The Multiverse Employee Handbook has this to say about discovering that your corporate rivals have built impressive facilities in space. Don't panic, but do expect your management to panic on your behalf. This condition typically manifests when employees learn that competing organizations have constructed permanent orbital installations with superior cafeteria facilities, while their own company is still debating whether the breakroom microwave needs replacing. The realization that the competition has achieved not merely functional space travel, but appetizing space travel, tends to accelerate symptoms considerably. The syndrome progresses through several predictable stages. Initial disbelief, surely they didn't build that in just 10 years. Followed by aggressive PowerPoint creation, our 5-year plan to achieve lunar dominance. And finally, the desperate filing of Form 27-BSPACE, Emergency Authorization for Celestial Office Expansion. The handbook notes that this creates a peculiar form of workplace anxiety where employees begin measuring success not in quarterly profits or customer satisfaction, but in the number of functioning space stations with cafeterias per organization. The condition is particularly acute among middle management, who discover that while they've been scheduling meetings about scheduling meetings, their counterparts elsewhere have been scheduling meetings on the moon. This tends to put terrestrial accomplishments in rather stark perspective, much like realizing your neighbor's garden shed is actually a rocket launch facility. You're tuned into the Multiverse Employee Handbook.
签到。点火，点火。
Today we're talking about China's rapid ascent from fifth nation to launch a satellite, to the folks with their own space station and a very ambitious lunar real estate portfolio. It's like finding out your corporate rival didn't just get a promotion. They built their own headquarters in orbit, started mining asteroids for office supplies, and are now scheduling quarterly reviews on the moon. Meanwhile, you're still trying to get approval for a new stapler. But here's the thing about space races. Unlike terrestrial corporate competition, when you're dealing with rockets and orbital mechanics, the stakes involve actual rocket science, international treaties that sound like they were written by caffeinated physicists, and the kind of long-term planning that makes 5-year business strategies look like grocery lists. But first, gather round the Quantum Conference Room booking system, my competitively orbiting colleagues, for a tale that would make even Elon Musk question his corporate expansion strategy. In the fluorescent-lit realm of quantum improbability solutions, specifically in the Department of Strategic Workplace Development, which existed in a superposition of desperately underfunded and criminally overstaffed, Sandra was having what could charitably be called an existential real estate crisis. It had started, as these things often do, with what appeared to be a routine competitive intelligence report landing in Sandra's inbox with all the subtlety of a meteor impact. Subject: urgent. Competitor analysis update from corporate.espionage@quantumimprobabilitysolutions.com to all.department.heads@quantumimprobabilitysolutions.com. Recent surveillance indicates that Far East Corporation has completed construction of their new headquarters. Please note, Headquarters is located in low Earth orbit, features a fully operational cafeteria with zero-gravity cappuccino service, and appears to be staffed by rotating crews of 3 employees working 6-month shifts. Also worth noting, they seem to have a lunar branch office under construction. Recommend immediate strategic response. Sandra stared at her monitor, then at her current office. A converted supply closet that she shared with 17 boxes of outdated quantum probability calculators and a printer that only worked during leap years. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. That's when the square-haired boss materialized beside her desk, his hair maintaining perfect cubic geometry despite violating several known laws of follicular physics. "Sandra," he announced, with the kind of urgency typically reserved for thermonuclear incidents. "We have a situation. The competition has a space station." "I see that, sir," Sandra replied, still processing the implications. "Should we file a complaint with someone?" "File a complaint? Sandra, they're conducting staff meetings 250 miles above sea level while we're still trying to get approval for ergonomic desk chairs. This requires immediate action. I want options on my desk by tomorrow morning." Within hours, Sandra found herself drowning in interdepartmental memos, each more ambitious than the last. The marketing department wanted to launch a satellite shaped like the company logo. Engineering proposed a Mars colony specializing in quantum widget manufacturing. HR suggested they start with a modest orbital break room just to test employee satisfaction metrics in microgravity. The paperwork alone threatened to achieve orbital velocity through sheer bureaucratic mass. Form 27 B-SPACE, Emergency Authorization for Celestial Office Expansion, required approval from 17 different departments, including the newly created Office of Extraterrestrial Workplace Safety, which existed solely to prevent Sandra from completing Form 27 B-SPACE. Meanwhile, reports kept trickling in about Far East Corporation's expanding cosmic empire. They'd apparently returned samples from the far side of the moon, not for scientific research, but to test whether lunar regolith made suitable potting soil for the plants in their orbital foyer. Their asteroid mining division was operational. They were planning crewed missions to Mars, ostensibly for team-building exercises. The final straw came when Sandra discovered that Far East was inviting other companies to use their space station for collaborative projects, essentially turning their orbital headquarters into the universe's most exclusive co-working space. The ultimate corporate humiliation, being excluded from the cool kids table when that table happened to be orbiting Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. Sandra's recommended solution after 3 weeks of forms, feasibility studies, and budget meetings was elegantly simple. QIS would construct a telescope powerful enough to spy on Far East's orbital activities from the ground. It wasn't space travel, but it was the closest thing to competitive intelligence that their budget could accommodate. The square-haired boss approved the proposal immediately, mostly because it was the only option that didn't require launching him personally into low Earth orbit for quarterly performance reviews. In order to speed up production and save costs, it was decided by the engineering department that the new telescope would use components borrowed from the break room coffee maker. 6 months later, Sandra found herself staring through QIS's new telescope at a bright spot moving across the night sky, wondering if those were Far East employees having their morning coffee and biscuits 250 miles overhead, completely unaware that their terrestrial competitors were watching them with a mixture of professional envy and cosmic awe. The telescope, she had to admit, also made excellent coffee. And that brings us to one of the most remarkable comeback stories in modern space exploration, though comeback might not be quite right. since China's space program had to build itself from scratch during one of the most tumultuous periods in modern history. China's journey to orbital prominence began during the height of the Cold War in the 1950s, when the nation was looking to establish technological independence in a world increasingly divided between American and Soviet spheres of influence.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time.
Beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He'd duck and cover, duck and cover.
The fascinating origin story involves Qian Xuesen, a brilliant Chinese scientist who had been working on rocket technology in the United States until McCarthyist paranoia led to his deportation in 1955.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many.
It's like being kicked out of the world's most exclusive engineering club, only to go home and build your own rocket program from scratch, which is exactly what happened. The early Chinese space program faced the kind of challenges that would make any project manager contemplate career changes.
前动！
While NASA was landing humans on the moon and the Soviets were pioneering space stations, China was still working on basic satellite technology. Their first satellite, Dongfang Hong-1, launched in 1970, making China the fifth nation capable of orbital launches, but arriving at the cosmic party about a decade after the other major powers had already established themselves. During the 1980s and 1990s, China embarked on one of the most calculated learning curves in space exploration history. Their Long March rockets began with a reputation that would make any insurance underwriter break into a cold sweat. But instead of retreating, China doubled down with a strategy that was as practical as it was ambitious. They turned their launch program into a business. Through Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms, China entered the global satellite market, offering cut-rate launch services to Western companies. Every successful launch bought China credibility and cash. Every failure taught them lessons that foreign clients effectively paid for. It wasn't entirely unprecedented. Arianespace in Europe and even Soviet Proton rockets had already been hired out. But what set China apart was how methodically they folded commercial work into a national development plan. NASA and the Soviets had treated spaceflight as primarily a government prestige project. China, by contrast, made it a revenue stream for learning rocket science. This clever inversion, being paid to practice orbital mechanics, gave Beijing something far more valuable than short-term profits, the technical foundation for the independent space program it commands today. While NASA was focused on the Space Shuttle program and ESA was building collaborative infrastructure like Ariane rockets, China was quietly studying, importing knowledge, and adapting technologies with the kind of patient determination typically associated with chess grandmasters planning 15 moves ahead. Unlike the dramatic space race narratives we're familiar with, China's approach involved decades of quiet, careful observation, systematic technology development, and learning from both the successes and costly mistakes of other space programs. They were essentially writing the ultimate case study in strategic patience, while everyone else was competing for immediate headlines. When we return from this brief quantum coffee break, we'll explore how that methodical approach transformed China from a distant observer into a major space power with their own orbital headquarters, lunar sample return missions, and plans that extend well into the 2040s. Plus, we'll examine how being excluded from international partnerships inadvertently created one of the most independent space programs in history. Welcome back, my astronomically ambitious administrators. While you were away, we've been calculating the probability of finding a corporate expansion strategy as methodically executed as China's space program. Spoiler alert, it's roughly equivalent to finding a quarterly budget that actually makes sense on the first read-through. Let's dive into how China transformed from a distant observer of space exploration into a major player with their own orbital real estate. And I'm including the kind of patient, methodical approach that would make a chess grandmaster nod in professional appreciation. The real turning point came in 2003 when Yang Liwei became China's first astronaut aboard Shenzhou 5.
9 a.m., October 15, 2003. Shenzhou 5 spacecraft successfully took China's astronaut Yang Liwei into space.
向世界各国人民问好，向在太空中工作的同行们问好。
It took 11 years' hard work to reach this moment. China first sent 4 unmanned spacecraft to test key technologies prior to Yang's ascent. Perfection was required in every detail.
This wasn't just a symbolic achievement. It placed China in the extraordinarily exclusive club of nations capable of independently sending humans into space. At that point, only the Soviet Union and the United States had managed human spaceflight, making China the third member of what was essentially the universe's most selective membership organization. But here's where China's approach became genuinely strategic rather than simply ambitious. While other nations were dealing with aging infrastructure and budget constraints, China was systematically testing every component necessary for long-term space operations. Their Tiangong-1 and Tiangong-2 space laboratories, launched between 2011 and 2016, weren't just proof-of-concept missions. They were comprehensive testing platforms for orbital docking, crew stays, and life support systems. Think of these as extensive dress rehearsals for the main performance. Tiangong-1 operated for nearly 5 years, testing everything from automated docking procedures to how well plants grow in microgravity. Tiangong-2 pushed further, supporting month-long crewed missions and testing advanced life support technologies. They were essentially building institutional knowledge about long-duration spaceflight, while the rest of the world was focused on other priorities. Meanwhile, the international space community was undergoing its own transitions. NASA was winding down the Space Shuttle program, a decision driven partly by safety concerns after the Columbia disaster and partly by the enormous costs of maintaining such a complex system. ESA continued its collaborative approach through ISS participation, but remained dependent on American and Russian launch capabilities and decision-making. Here's where the story takes an ironic twist. China was deliberately excluded from ISS participation due to U.S. policies restricting technology sharing with Chinese entities. The Wolf Amendment, passed in 2011, essentially locked China out of the most significant international space collaboration in history. But this exclusion, intended to limit China's space capabilities, inadvertently forced them to develop completely independent capabilities. And this brings us to what might be the most impressive engineering project in human history: the current Tiangong space station. Construction began with the Tianhe core module launch in April 2021, followed by the Wentian and Mengtian laboratory modules, with the entire assembly completed by November 2022. That's a functional, permanently crewed space station built in less than 2 years. Side note, China assembled its entire Tiangong space station in less time than it takes most cities to decide on adding bike lanes to Main Street. Comparing Tiangong to the International Space Station reveals fascinating differences in approach and capability. The ISS weighs about 420 tons and has been continuously occupied since 2000. It's humanity's most successful international collaboration and most productive orbital laboratory, capable of conducting hundreds of simultaneous experiments across dozens of scientific disciplines. Tiangong, at 66 tons, is significantly smaller, but represents completely different engineering philosophy. It's newer, more streamlined, and designed for efficiency rather than maximum capacity. The station maintains 3 taikonauts working 6-month rotations, compared to the ISS's typical crew of 6 to 7 from multiple countries. During crew rotations, Tiangong briefly hosts up to 6 astronauts during week-long handover periods, a process where outgoing crews train their replacements on everything from scientific experiments to which buttons absolutely cannot be pushed without ground control approval.
What does this button do?
The ISS manages more complex international crew rotations, sometimes with up to 11 people aboard during transition periods. What's particularly impressive about China's approach is the systematic technology development. Every component of their space program builds on previous missions while testing technologies for future goals. Their space station serves as a testing ground for long-duration spaceflight systems that will be essential for lunar base operations and eventual Mars missions. The orbital mechanics alone demonstrate remarkable engineering capability. Tiangong maintains its orbit using Hall effect ion thrusters, highly efficient propulsion systems that allow precise station keeping with minimal fuel consumption. This isn't revolutionary technology, but it's sophisticated engineering implemented at scale for long-term orbital operations. China has repeatedly extended invitations for international cooperation on Tiangong, offering experiment opportunities to other nations and announcing plans to train international astronauts. However, geopolitical realities have limited participation. The same policies that excluded China from ISS collaboration continue to restrict American participation in Chinese space projects. The European Space Agency initially explored cooperation, including joint astronaut training in 2017, but by 2023 decided against sending astronauts to Tiangong due to budget constraints and the complexity of managing relationships with both Chinese and American space partners. The result is that China operates a modern, efficient space station with limited international participation, not entirely by choice, but influenced by the same geopolitical dynamics that originally excluded them from international collaboration. They've essentially built the capability they were prevented from sharing, creating an interesting parallel to the ISS partnership from which they were excluded. Now, let's explore how China transformed from a nation learning rocket science through commercial satellite launches into a major space power. And the story involves both impressive achievements and some rather questionable approaches to intellectual property acquisition. China's lunar program, the Chang'e missions, demonstrates both genuine innovation and the benefits of building on decades of previous exploration. Chang'e 5, launched in 2020, brought back the first fresh lunar samples since 1976, a significant achievement that required mastering complex orbital rendezvous, sample collection, and Earth return technologies. But it's worth noting that these missions built extensively on techniques pioneered by the Soviet lunar program and NASA's Apollo missions. from landing procedures to sample storage methods. Chang'e 6, completed in 2024, accomplished something genuinely unprecedented, returning samples from the far side of the Moon. This required innovative communication solutions using relay satellites, since the far side permanently faces away from Earth. However, the underlying technologies, from heat shields to parachute systems, drew heavily on decades of sample return experience developed by other space agencies. China's approach to space technology development has been notably pragmatic, though not always entirely original. Western intelligence agencies have documented extensive efforts to acquire space technologies through both legal technology transfer agreements and less legitimate means. The European Space Agency and NASA have both reported concerns about intellectual property theft related to satellite technology, rocket engines, and spacecraft systems. For example, China's Long March rocket family shows remarkable similarities to Soviet and American designs from earlier decades. Their crew capsule design bears striking resemblance to Russian Soyuz spacecraft, and their space station modules utilize life support technologies that closely mirror systems developed for the ISS. This isn't necessarily unusual. Space technology often involves convergent engineering solutions, but the pattern suggests systematic acquisition of existing technologies rather than independent development. Their Mars program illustrates both the benefits and limitations of this approach. Tianwen-1's successful 2020 mission to Mars was genuinely impressive, achieving orbit insertion, surface landing, and rover operations in their first attempt. However, this success built directly on detailed Mars atmospheric data, landing techniques, and operational procedures developed through NASA's decades of Mars exploration. China's space achievements represent a fascinating case study in technological catch-up strategies. They've systematically studied the successes and failures of other space programs, avoiding costly mistakes while rapidly developing capabilities. When NASA struggled with space shuttle complexity and expense, China focused on simpler, more reliable capsule designs. When the ISS partnership proved politically complicated, China developed independent space station capabilities. But this approach has limitations. While China excels at implementing and scaling proven technologies, their track record for fundamental space technology innovation remains limited. They haven't developed revolutionary propulsion systems, breakthrough life support technologies, or novel spacecraft designs. Instead, they've become extraordinarily effective at taking existing concepts and implementing them efficiently and reliably. Their future plans reveal both ambition and continued reliance on established approaches. The planned crewed lunar landing by 2030 uses mission architecture remarkably similar to NASA's Apollo program: separate command and lunar modules, Earth orbit rendezvous, and direct return trajectories. Their proposed Mars sample return mission, Tianwen-3, closely follows the mission profile developed by NASA and ESA for their joint Mars sample return program. China's space program represents perhaps the most successful example of technological leapfrogging in history. They've compressed decades of development into years, avoided expensive dead ends, and achieved remarkable capabilities in a relatively short time frame. However, this success raises important questions about the balance between learning from others' work and developing original capabilities. The International Lunar Research Station, China's partnership with Russia for lunar-based development, illustrates both the opportunities and challenges of their approach. By partnering with Russia, they gain access to decades of space exploration experience, but they're also working with a space program that has struggled with funding and technological updates since the Soviet era. Meanwhile, NASA's Artemis program represents a different philosophy. leveraging private sector innovation through companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, developing new technologies like the Space Launch System, and building international partnerships that include technological contributions from multiple nations. China's space achievements are undeniably impressive, but they've been achieved through a combination of systematic learning, strategic patience, substantial government investment, and, according to Western intelligence agencies, extensive acquisition of technologies developed by others. Whether this approach can sustain China's space ambitions as they push into increasingly complex missions, like crewed Mars exploration, remains an open question that may define the future of international space competition. Well, my interdimensionally competitive colleagues, we've reached the end of another quantum exploration into the cosmos of strategic patience and technological leapfrogging. Today we've learned that China's space program represents one of the most remarkable examples of how to systematically transform from distant observer to major player through methodical learning, substantial investment, and what Western intelligence agencies diplomatically call aggressive technology acquisition strategies. We've discovered that space exploration, despite representing humanity's highest technological aspirations, inevitably reflects the same patterns we see in earthly competition. The careful study of successful approaches, the strategic borrowing of proven concepts, and the occasional blurring of lines between inspiration and appropriation. It's a fascinating reminder that even when we're literally reaching for the stars, we're still fundamentally human in our approaches to achievement. There's something both impressive and slightly unsettling about watching a space program systematically avoid the expensive mistakes made by others, while rapidly developing capabilities that took other nations decades to achieve. It's like watching someone complete a difficult video game by studying everyone else's playthrough videos, undeniably effective, but raising questions about the nature of genuine accomplishment versus strategic optimization. But perhaps that's exactly what makes China's space achievements so remarkable and complex. They've demonstrated that patient observation, systematic learning, and focused investment can compress decades of technological development into years. Whether this approach can sustain their ambitions as they push into genuinely unexplored territory, where there are no previous successes to study and adapt, will likely define the next chapter of international space competition. The real test isn't whether China can successfully implement proven technologies, but whether they can innovate solutions to problems no one has solved yet. Crewed Mars missions, sustainable lunar bases, and interplanetary resource extraction will require the kind of fundamental breakthroughs that can't be borrowed from others' work, simply because no one has figured them out yet. Find us across the social media multiverse. Follow us on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, X, and even our little Reddit subreddit where we post random space news and source links we used in the research for each episode, or simply visit our website where all dimensions of our content converge in one convenient location. And if you've enjoyed today's exploration of strategic space development, why not share it with a fellow technology enthusiast? Perhaps you know someone who's wondered about the fine line between learning from others and developing original capabilities, or whether rapid technological advancement always requires building on previous work. This is your quantum coherent correspondent, reminding you that in the multiverse of space exploration, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. The question is whether we're reaching higher or just getting a better view of what others have already accomplished. And somewhere out there, in a parallel universe where cosmic competition is settled through interpretive dance rather than rocket launches. China and the United States are locked in an eternal ballet performance about orbital mechanics, while Russia provides dramatic musical accompaniment on a pipe organ. Meanwhile, in our universe, we can only hope that sanity prevails, and governments realize that slashing space agency budgets while competitors are methodically expanding their cosmic capabilities might be roughly equivalent to canceling your gym membership, just as your neighbors start training for the Olympics.
Hello?
Hey, I'm Rob Corrigan, the human who dreamt up the Multiverse Employee Handbook, because I can't stop marveling at how strange and wonderful the universe is, and how often it behaves like a very large company with confusing corporate policies. In a world increasingly run by AI, I think it matters to be clear about what's human-made and what's conjured by machine magic. So here's the straight-up rundown. The host, David, is a professional voice actor. The voice you hear has been digitized using 11 Labs voice cloning technology, with his blessing and excellent enunciation. The episode thumbnails are created with OpenArt's AI models. Music and sound effects come from Pixabay, composed by human artists. Everything else, the writing, the jokes, the research, is 100% me, human hands, human brain, and occasional human muttering. Thanks for listening, and for being a good human in an increasingly automated cosmos. And if you like this show and make it this far, it would really mean a lot to me if you shared it with a colleague, a friend, or anyone. It's really the best way to make podcasts like this grow, and I sincerely appreciate it.
Rob, do stop ringing after hours. The kettle's on and I'm halfway through a biscuit. Toodaloo.